Hi, my name is Corrie, and we continue reading today from Corrie ten Boom's book, The Hiding Place. Today we are reading Introduction and Chapter 1. The introduction is from Brother Andrew. Anyone who thinks Christianity is boring has not yet been introduced to my friend Corrie ten Boom. One of the qualities I admired best about this remarkable lady was her zest for adventure. Although she was many years my senior, she traveled tirelessly with me beyond the Iron Curtain, meeting with clandestine Christian cell groups in the days when this meant risking prison or deportation. They are putting their lives on the line for what they believe, she would say. Why shouldn't I? If Corrie were alive today, I have no doubt she would insist on going with me to the current hotspots of persecution, and how she would delight in sharing her radical faith with bold believers like the Christian Motorcycle Association, that wonderful group of men and women who often drive their bikes into poor countries and then give them away to pastors who have no other way to get around. If you have never met Corrie ten Boom, the best way to enter into a lifetime of friendship with her and her Lord is through the pages of this book. As The Hiding Place celebrates its 35th anniversary, a new generation is responding to her ringing challenge. Come with me and step into the greatest adventure you will ever know. Brother Andrew, founder of Open Doors and the author of God's Smuggler. Chapter 1. The 100th birthday party. I jumped out of bed that morning with one question in my mind: sun or fog? Usually it was fog in January in Holland, dank, chill and grey. But occasionally, on a rare and magic day, a white winter sun broke through. I leaned as far as I could from the single window in my bedroom. It was always hard to see the sky from the bedgie. Blank brick walls looked back at me, the backs of other ancient buildings in this crowded center of old Haarlem. But up there, where my neck craned to see, above these crazy roofs and crooked chimneys, was a square of pale pearl sky. It was going to be a sunny day for the birthday party. I attempted a little waltz as I took my new dress from the tipsy old wardrobe against the wall. Father's bedroom was directly under mine, but at 77, he slept soundly. That was one advantage to growing old, I thought, as I worked my arms into the sleeves and surveyed the effect in the mirror of the wardrobe door. Although some Dutch women in 1937 were wearing their skirts knee-high, knee-length, mine was still a cautious 3 inches above my shoes. You are not growing younger yourself, I reminded my reflection. Maybe it was the new dress that made me look more critically at myself than usual. 45 years old, unmarried, waistline long since vanished. My sister Betsy, though 7 years older than I, still had that slender grace that made people turn and look after her in the street. Heaven knows it wasn't her clothes. Our little watch shop had never made much money, but when Betsy put on a dress, something wonderful happened to it. On me, until Betsy caught up with them, hems sagged, stockings tore, and collars twisted. But today, I thought, standing back from the mirror as far as I could in the small room, the effect of dark maroon was very smart. Far below me, down on the street, the doorbell rang. Callers? Before 7 in the morning, I opened my bedroom door and plunged down the steep, twisting stairway. These stairs were an afterthought in this curious old house. Actually, it was 2 houses. The one in the front was a typical tiny old Haarlem structure, 3 stories high, 2 rooms deep, and only 1 room wide. At some unknown point in its long history, its rear wall had been knocked through to join it with the even thinner, steeper house in back of it, which had only 3 rooms, one on top of the other. And this narrow corkscrew staircase squeezed between the 2. Quick as I was, Betsy was all at the door ahead of me. An enormous spray of flowers filled the doorway. As Betsy took them, a small delivery boy appeared. "A nice day for the party, miss," he said, trying to peer past the flowers as though coffee and cake might already be set out. He would be coming for the party later, as indeed, it seemed, would all of Haarlem. Betsy and I searched the bouquet of the cart. "Pickwick!" we shouted together. Pickwick was an enormously wealthy customer who not only bought the very finest watches, but often came upstairs to the family part of the house above the shop. His real name was Herman Sleuring. Pickwick was the name Betsy and I used between ourselves because he looked so incredibly like the illustrator's drawing in our copy of Dickens. Herman Sleuring was without a doubt the ugliest man in Haarlem. Short, immensely fat, head bald as Holland cheese, he was so wall-eyed that you were never quite sure whether he was looking at you or someone else. And as kind and generous as he was fearsome to look at. The flowers had come to the side door, the door the family used, opening to a tiny alleyway, and Betsy and I carried them from the little hall into the shop. First was the workroom, where watches and clocks were repaired. There was the high bench over which father had bent for so many years, doing the delicate, painstaking work that was known as the finest in Holland. And there, in the center of the room, was my bench. And next to mine, Hans the apprentice's. And against the wall, old Christoffel's. Beyond the workroom was the customers' part of the shop, with its glass case full of watches. All the wall clocks were striking 7 as Betsy and I carried the flowers in and looked for the most artistic spot to put them. Ever since childhood, I had loved to step into this room where 100 ticking voices welcomed me. It was still dark inside because the shutters had not been drawn back from the windows on the street. I unlocked the street door and stepped out into Barteljorisstraat. The other shops up and down the narrow street were shuttered and silent. The opticians next door, the dress shop, the bakers, wheel furriers across the street. I folded back the shutters and stood for a minute admiring the window display that Betsy and I had last agreed upon. This window was always a great source of debate between us. I wanted to display as much of our stock as could be squeezed onto the shelf, and Betsy maintaining that 2 or 3 little beautiful watches with perhaps a piece of silk or satin swirled beneath was more elegant and more inviting. But this time The window satisfied us both. It held a collection of clocks and pocket watches, all at least 100 years old, borrowed for the occasion from friends and antique dealers all over the city. For today, the shop's 100th birthday. It was on this day in January 1837 that Father's father had placed in this window a sign, 10 boom watches. For the last 10 minutes, with a heavenly disregard for the precisions of passing time, the church bells of Haarlem had been pealing out 7. And now, half a block away in the Times Square, the great bell of St. Barbo's solemnly donged 7 times. I lingered in the street to count them, though it was cold in the January dawn. Of course, everyone in Haarlem had radios now, but I could remember when the life of the city had run on St. Barbo time, and only trainmen and others who needed to know the exact hour had come here to read the astronomical clock. Father would take the train to Amsterdam each week to bring back the time from the Naval Observatory, and it was a source of pride to him that the astronomical clock was never more than 2 seconds off in the 7 days. There it stood now, as I stepped back into the shop, still tall and gleaming on its concrete block, but shorn now of eminence. The doorbell in the alley was ringing again. More flowers. So it went on for an hour. Large bouquets and small ones, elevate set pieces and homegrown plants in clay pots. For although the party was for the shop, the affection of the city was for Father. Haarlem's grand old man, they called him, and they were setting about to prove it. When the shop and the workroom would not hold another bouquet, Betsy and I started carrying them upstairs to the 2 rooms above the shop. Though it was 20 years since her death, these were still Tante Jans's rooms. Tante Jans was Mother's older sister, and her presence lingered in the massive dark furniture she had left behind her. Betsy set down a pot of greenhouse-grown tulips and stepped back with a little cry of pleasure. "Corrie, just look how much brighter!" Poor Betsy. The BG was so closed in by the houses around that the window plants she started each spring never grew tall enough to bloom. At 7:45, Hans the apprentice arrived, and at 8, Toos, our sales lady bookkeeper. Toos was a sour-faced, scowling individual whose ill temper had made it impossible for her to keep a job until 10 years ago. She had come to work for Father. Father's gentle courtesy had disarmed and mellowed her, and though she would have died sooner than admit it, she loved him as fiercely as she disliked the rest of the world. We left Hans and Toos to answer the doorbell and went upstairs to get breakfast. Only 3 places at the table, I thought as I set out the plates. The dining room was in the house at the rear, 5 steps higher than the shop, but lower than Tante Jans's rooms. To me, this room, with its single window looking into the alley, was the heart of the home. This table, with a blanket thrown over it, had made me a tent or a pirate's cove when I was small. I'd done my homework here as a school child, Hear Mama read aloud from Dickens on winter evenings, while the coal whistled in the brick hearth and cast a red glow over the title proclaiming, Jesus is Victor. We used only a corner of the table now, Father, Betsy and I, but to me, the rest of the family was always there. There was Mama's chair. Other two sisters had Mama's chair and the three aunts' places over there. Not only Tante Jan's, but Mama's other two sisters had also lived with us. Next to me sat my older sister, Nolly, and Willem, the only boy in the family, there beside Father. Nolly and Willem had had homes of their own many years now, and Mama and the two aunts were dead. But still, I seemed to see them here. Of course, their chairs hadn't stayed empty long. Father could never bear a house without children. And whenever he heard a child in need of a home, a new face would appear at the table. Here's a photo of Father Casper as an expert watchmaker for more than 60 years. Somehow, out of his watch shop that never made money, he fed and dressed and cared for 11 more children after his own 4 were grown. But now, these 2 had grown up and married or gone off to work. And so I laid 3 plates on the table. Betsy brought the coffee in from the tiny kitchen, which was little more than a closet off the dining room, and took bread from the drawer in the sideboard. She was setting them on the table when we heard Father's step coming down the staircase. He went a little slowly now on the winding stairs, but still as punctual as one of his own watches, he entered the dining room. And as he had every morning since I could remember, at 8:10. "Father," I said, kissing him and savouring the aroma of cigars that always clung in his long beard. "A sunny day for the party!" Father's hair and beard were now as white as the best tablecloth Betsy had lain for this special day. But his blue eyes behind the thick round spectacles were as mild and merry as ever. And he gazed from one of us to the other with frank delight. "Corrie, dear, my dear Betsy, how gay and lovely you both look." He bowed his head as he sat down, said the blessing over bread, and then went on eagerly. "Your mother, how she would have loved these new styles, and seeing you both looking so pretty." Betsy and I looked hard into our coffee cup to keep from laughing. These new styles were the despair of our younger nieces, who were always trying to get us into brighter clothes, shorter skirts, and lower necklines. But conservative though we were, it was true that Mama had never had anything even as bright as my deep maroon dress or Betsy's dark blue one. In Mama's day, married women and unmarried ones of certain age wore black, from the chin to the ground. I had never seen Mama and the aunts in any other color. "How Mama would have loved everything about today," Betsy said. "Remember how she loved occasions? Mama could have coffee on the stove and a cake in the oven as fast as most people could say, 'Best wishes.' And since she knew almost everyone in Haarlem, especially the poor, sick and neglected, there was almost no day in the year that was not for somebody," as she would say with eyes shining, a very special occasion. And so we sat over our coffee as one should on anniversaries and looked back to the time when Mama was alive and beyond, back to the time when Father was a small boy growing up in this same house. "I was born right in this room," he said, as though he had not told us 100 times. "Only, of course, it wasn't the dining room then, but a bedroom. And the bed was a kind of cupboard set into the wall with no windows and no light or air of any kind. I was the first baby who lived. I don't know how many there were before me, but they all died. Mother had tuberculosis, you see, and they didn't know about contaminated air or keeping babies away from sick people." It was a day for memories, a day for calling up the past. How could we have guessed as we sat there, 2 middle-aged spinsters and an old man, that in place of memories were about to be given adventures such as we had never dreamed of. Adventure and anguish, horror and heaven were just around the corner, and we did not know. "Oh, Father, Betsy, if I had known, would I have gone ahead? Could I have done the things I did? But how could I know? How could I imagine this white-haired man called Oupa, grandfather, by all the children of Harlem? How could I imagine this man thrown by strangers into a grave without a name? And Betsy, with her high lace collar and gift for making beauty all around her, how could I picture this dearest person on earth to me, standing naked before a room full of men? In that room, on that day, such thoughts were not even thinkable. Father stood up and took the big brass hinged Bible from its shelf as Tours and Hans rapped on the door and came in. Scripture reading at 8:30 each morning for all who were in the house was another of the fixed points around which life in the BG revolved. Father opened the big volume and Betsy and I held our breaths. Surely today of all days, when there was still so much to do, it would not be a whole chapter. But he was turning to the Gospel of Luke, where we'd left off yesterday. Such long chapters in Luke too. With his finger at the place, Father looked up. "Where is Christophels?" he said. Christophels was the third and only other employee in the shop, a bent, wizened little man who looked older than Father, though actually he was 10 years younger. I remembered the day 6 or 7 years earlier when he had first come into the shop, so ragged and woe-begone that I'd assumed that he was one of the beggars who had the veggie marked as a sure meal. I was about to send him up to the kitchen where Betsy kept a pot of soup simmering, when he announced with great dignity that he was considering permanent employment and was offering his services first to us. It turned out that Christophels belonged to an almost vanished trade, the itinerant clock mender, who trudged on foot throughout the land, regulating and repairing the tall pendulum clocks that were the pride of every Dutch farmhouse. But if I was surprised at the grand manner of this shabby little man, I was even more astonished when father hired him on the spot. "They are the finest clockmen anywhere," he told me later. "These wandering clocksmiths. There's not a repair job they haven't handled with just the tools in their sack." And so it had proved through the years as people from all over Haarlem brought their clocks to him. What he did with his wages, we never knew. He had remained as tattered and threadbare as ever. Father hinted as much as he dared, for next to his shabbiness, Christopher's most notable quality was his pride, and then gave it up. And now, for the first time ever, Christoffels was late. Father polished his glasses with his napkin and started to read, his deep voice lingering lovingly over the words. He had reached the bottom of the page when we heard Christoffels' shuffling steps on the stairs. The door opened and all of us gasped. Christoffels was resplendent in a new black suit, new checkered vest, a snowy white shirt, flowered tie, and stiff starched collar. I tore my eyes from the spectacle as swiftly as I could, for Christoffels' expression forbade us to notice anything out of the ordinary. "Christoffels, my dear associate," father murmured in his formal, old-fashioned way. "What joy to see you on this auspicious day." And hastily he resumed his Bible reading. Before he reached the end of the chapter, the doorbells were ringing, both the shop bell on the street and the family bell in the alley. Betsy ran to make more coffee and put her tartjes in the oven, while Toos and I hurried to the doors. It seemed that everyone in Haarlem wanted to be first to shake father's hand. Before long, a steady stream of guests was winding up the narrow staircase to Tante Jans's rooms, where he sat almost lost in a thicket of flowers. I was helping one of the older guests in the up the steep stairs when Betsy seized my arm. "Corrie, we're going to need Nolly's cups right away. How can we?" "I'll go get them." Our sister Nolly and her husband were coming that afternoon as soon as their 6 children got home from school. I dashed down the stairs, took my coat and my bicycle from inside the alley door, and was wheeling it over the threshold when Betsy's voice reached me, soft but firm. "Corrie, your new dress." And so I whirled back up the stairs to my room, changed into my oldest skirt, and set out over the bumpy brick streets. I always loved to bike to Nolly's house. She and her husband lived about a mile and a half from the BG, outside the grand old centre of the city. The streets there were broader and straighter. Even the sky seemed bigger. Across the town square I pedalled, over the canal, on the Grote Hout Bridge, and along the Wagenweg, reveling in the thin winter sunshine. Nolly lived on Bos en Hovenstraat, a block of identical attached houses with white curtains and potted plants in the windows. How could I foresee as I zipped around the corner that one summer day, when the hyacinths in the commercial bulb flats nearby were ripe and brown, I would break my bicycle here and stand with my heart thudding in my throat. daring to go no closer for fear of what was taking place behind Nolly's starched curtains. Today I careened onto the sidewalk and burst through the door with never a knock. Nolly, the beach is jammed already. You ought to see. We need cups right now. Nolly came out of the kitchen, her round, pretty face flushed with baking. They are all packed by the door. Oh, I wish I could go back with you, but I've got batches of cookies still to bake, and I promised Flip and the children I'd wait for them. You're all coming, aren't you? Yes, Corrie, Peter will be there. Nolly was loading the cups into the bicycle bags. As a dutiful aunt, I tried to love all my nieces and nephews equally. But Peter, well, was Peter. At 13, he was a musical prodigy with a rascal and the pride of my life. He's even written a special song in honor of the day, Nolly said. Here now, you'll have to carry this bagful in your hand, so be careful. Well, to be continued. We will carry on next time on the rest of chapter 1 of The Hiding Place.